here from Family, and we're here at Nursery World 2023. I'm here with Adam Marycz, who is an early years teacher and writer, and Adam's agreed to sit down and answer some questions. So thank you so much, Adam, for being with us.
No problem, thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk a little bit about ethos and curriculum, as that's what you've been talking about today. Are you able to say a little bit briefly about how ethos and curriculum connect?
Yeah, of course, I'll try. So when you're thinking about writing your curriculum, I think it's really important that you understand what early years is to you, what your core values are and what your beliefs are. I think it's too easy to get caught up with the fact that we feel we need a documented curriculum for Ofsted and with the new development matters and the new framework, and we can sort of just concentrate so much on that we can forget what we actually want early years to look like and what we want the children to learn. I think it's important to always remember, start at the end really, what you want those children to be when they leave. The conversation I was having this morning with people in there is like, who do you want your children to be? And then you can work back in how you get there, and then you can look at all the other areas of learning like maths and literacy and all of that. But for me, my core value is I want them to be good people, and I think that's where you can begin from. And then you can then start to build your curriculum and sequence it so you can look at ensuring that they build the knowledge and skills that they need to get there.
I think that's really interesting, and I think especially when we talk so much at the moment about school readiness and lack thereof, having I mean, obviously it's complex, but having a relatively simple idea of this is what I want children to be, and having them wanting them to be good people is noble, isn't it? We want our children to be happy and generous and caring and able to go out into the world. So I love that. I suppose the next logical question is where settings are still kind of struggling to get to grips with their curriculum, or they're struggling to define it, or even struggling to define their ethos. What would you advise them to do? What's the first step in that direction?
The first step is to sit down as a team and discuss what, again, like I said before, what you want those children to be, what knowledge and skills you want them to have in each stage of the development. So whether you want to go by rooms, whether you want to go by ages, whatever you want to do, however you feel is most appropriate for your cohort of children, and then have those conversations on how those knowledge and skills that they need to build, and then you can roll back as to how you want them to do that. I think, again, practitioners think so much about, well, they need to be able to count to 12 or 20, they need to be able to write their name before they go to school, and that idea of school readiness, and are we just preparing the children for school rather than preparing them for life? Like, they need to be able to make a positive contribution, and they need to be prepared for that, and we know them better than anybody else. And whilst curriculum being thrown into the limelight like it was has been confusing for people and has been scary for people, because when Ofsted come in, and whether we like it or not, we have to have a nod to what Ofsted are looking for. When they come in and they say, what's your curriculum, you need to be confident in that, and you need to be able to convey it. I don't think you necessarily need to document it, as long as you're confident in explaining what it is and that those sequences and how you want that to be. It comes down to not just your early years values either, your personal values, and that will shape that, and you've got to involve the whole team in that, because if they don't buy into that, and if not everyone is on board and has that same shared philosophy and that shared vision, it's also it's going to fall flat.
What you said there really resonated, because it is so often about confidence.
Yeah.
Because you're right, as educators, we do know the children so well.
Yeah.
And it can be intimidating when new vocabulary comes in, like curriculum, and maybe we're not particularly confident with that, or you might know exactly what you're doing and why, but perhaps when the inspector asks you, you think, oh, crumbs, and it's about having that real confidence to say, I know what I'm doing and I know why, which I think is where the ethos comes in, right?
Yeah, we've always had a curriculum. I think the thing that we can forget really easily is now, because the word is such a buzzword and because it's something that we're asked about all the time, we can think it's something completely new to us and alien to us and something that we don't understand. Whereas if you think about it, you will have always had one, because what you teach your children every day is part of your curriculum. It's just maybe that formalisation of that thought process, meaning that, okay, now you need to think that is part of your curriculum and put those thoughts together. And that's where the idea of whether you document it or not comes in. there's many people who believe that you document it and have written wonderful 7, 80, 90 page curriculums for the entire early years journey, from that curriculum goal at the end to where it begins at the start. And if that's how you're most comfortable and that's how you think it's most appropriate, that's completely fine. But just personally, I don't really think it adds that much value. I think if you've got those curriculum goals at the end, they're important, and maybe they're important to be set down, to be displayed, to be written down for everybody. But the how you get there will really depend on your children and the skills that they have, because one child's skill is not another child's skill. And the idea of the sequenced curriculum, yes, it does need to be sequenced, yes, it does need to build on a skill before, but it doesn't come rote. It's not like that old tick list mentality of the old development matters where, they could do that right now, let's go on to this. Oh, they could do that, let's go on to this. We've got to ensure that we don't go back to that in the form of, we just write it ourselves as opposed to using one that's been given to us.
To be honest, I think that's a really key message, because for so long now, since the revised EYFS, we've all been talking about we should not be tick listing, don't be tracking children this way. You can't just say, they've done this in development matters, let's go down to the box down. Mm-hmm. And there is a real risk that if we're not sensitive or open about how we think about children's learning or how we think about our curriculum, that we could go back to that idea of we've decided it's this next, so that's what they have to do next. It is,
I think it's the pressure potentially that we all feel, again, when Ofsted come in or an outside person comes in, to have it written down so you can go, I promise this is what we're doing, this is what we believe, this is how we're doing it. And if you've got that document there, the easiest thing to do is to get it out and go, right, next, what we're planning next, what we're planning next, what we're planning next. And it's that comfort blanket, it's that security that we've all had in the sector for 10 years that's now gone. But it doesn't mean that what you do day to day has changed. It just means that actually it should be much more about being in the moment with those children and knowing it should be much more individualised than it was before.
I think that's a key point. I love that. It seems remiss not to talk about the cost of living crisis, and we've been talking about that a lot during the event. Thinking about how that's maybe affected your cohort or the children you're teaching, have you seen any really great examples of where educators are supporting each other or supporting families? How's that working for you?
I think where my setting is located, it is relatively affluent, just because of the demographic of it. But even from that point of view, we've seen, parents starting to access food banks where they haven't done previously. Parents coming, to ask us or the school that we're based in, that their family support work, and becoming more involved in supporting parents from that point of view. And again, with staff, everyone's struggling with that cost of simply getting to work every day. That idea of how much it costs in your fuel to get to work. And that positive of parents, children and parents and staff being in actually a warm environment in that day in school. As I say, it's not necessarily something that I see so much from a setting, but it's something you see all the time on social media. You have those conversations with other people and you understand that it is really difficult and things are hard, and purely from a business point of view as well, the pressures of the cost of running the setting are significantly more than they were before, and it's trying to ensure that what do you do with that as a setting? You can't pass that on to parents realistically, because parents can't afford it, but as a setting, can you really afford to keep taking that burden? It's something that over the next 12 months we'll see how that plays out, hopefully with a funding rise coming sometime soon, but we'll see.
I would love that. I'd love that, but I think you're absolutely right there, because you've identified that issue where settings are potentially even at risk of running at a loss, but parents are also feeling the pinch. So how can we balance, running a business or making our early years settings sustainable with actually continuing to be able to provide that service for children and parents? It's a real dilemma at the moment. The other thing that you and I have spoken a little bit about before is men in the early years sector. Hold on. Well, let me rephrase that.
Some editing for you.
The other thing that you and I have spoken about before is men in the early years sector. Do you feel that we're making progress there?
I would say not. I think it's probably pretty obvious to most people who work in the sector that that's not really changing. I sat in a seminar yesterday with Shaddai Tembo, who was talking about keeping men on the agenda in the earliest, and he shared the statistic, which is like across Europe it's 3% of the workforce, and that's moved like 0.4% over the last 10 years, and that progress isn't there. There've been some campaigns which, you know, me and you have spoken about before, like Men in the Early Years, and those kind of campaigns that have got great intention, but whether, when we drill down, what kind of impact that's having, I think we can see from the statistics is pretty much non-existent. Obviously, it's not just a problem that is linked to this country. It's a problem, seems to be, across Europe. Certainly, I think the data said that a couple of Scandinavian countries have got higher, like Norway, I think was 6%, which is still really grim. 6% isn't fantastic. It's maybe better than where we're at, but it's still not brilliant, and the problems with getting men into the sector are significant. And even though it's great to see, you know, here we have some men who are involved in early years, and you see more maybe becoming more involved in this side of early years in terms of getting their voices out there than you have done previously. They're still massively underrepresented, and it's about that idea of gender diversity, but not for tokenism. So, and how do you strike that balance between the need for more men, for those positive role models for the children, but not bringing men in for the sake of bringing men in?
I think something that's really worth highlighting as well is I've seen various media regarding men in the early years, and very often they become tokenized to the point that they are suggested as a replacement for an absent father, or they're the kind of fun, rough and tumble educators. How can we kind of move beyond this idea that male practitioners are there to fill some sort of unique gap?
Yeah, I think it's about seeing the value of what different practitioners bring, and I think that's where the gender diversity comes in, and it's about what you bring to the table rather than necessarily that you're a man or woman, and trying to stay away from that perception of, well, the men do PE, the men do sport, the men come in for forest school, you know, that's when you do it. One of our settings gets football coaches in, and it's brilliant, but that's the only time that the children see men playing with the children, because that particular setting doesn't have any male staff, and it's a great role model for them. But then the flip side balancing of that is, are you just actually then perpetuating those stereotypes that you've already got, because that's how children perceive men, as being the people who are there, like you say, the rough and tumble, the sport, the running around, all that kind of thing. And then in the media, it's the same. A lot of media stories and things are like you'll see them with a photo of a man playing with a child, but that doesn't necessarily share the journey of a man and what it's like to be in early years. And I think, like, personally, as a man in early years, I think we've got the men that are involved in it have got to take some responsibility, and then we've got to try and find a way to get to have those conversations with people, with teenagers, with people at university, with college students who've not thought about early years, who've thought about education potentially, but haven't thought about early years, about why it's so important. Because again, people don't necessarily, it's a wider media problem of the value of early years, isn't it? Which isn't seen more, on a wider level. People involved in early years know the value of it, but people who are outside it don't necessarily get that value.
I think it's really interesting because we've seen a renewed focus on the early years with the Royal Foundation focusing on early childhood with charities like Pregnant Then Screwed, and then Ofsted's recent focus on the first 5 years. Do you think that could help?
I think it could help, but I think it's got to be channeled in the right way. I think we've got to stop just continually doing new reports and just doing, we're going to do new research, we're going to get new data, when there's enough data out there already to show that no difference has been made. And I think it's one of those exercises where we're just kicking the can down the road to get more evidence that tells us the same thing. We'll recommend the same actions, but then nothing's ever done with it. And it's really easy to get stuck in that cycle, government being cyclical complain to that. But the Royal Foundation is great, and it's going to make a spotlight on it, but what's going to happen with that work then? What's the foundation going to do over the next 30 years to actually to deliver what they said they found, and it's the same with every report. Ofsted the first 5 years, that again, okay, it's a great idea, but how's it going to work in practice? Where's the money coming from? Where's the funding? Who is going to do that? Whose responsibility is that?
I think it's a really, really fair point, because the crux of it is, you're absolutely right. We know, or rather, we as a sector already know the value, and there is a phenomenal amount of evidence. So I can only hope that this kind of seemingly renewed focus will hopefully kind of spur some action and some money. That would be great.
Yeah, we could hope.
The final thing I wanted to chat to you a bit about is I noticed on your Twitter feed you shared a post by Aaron Bradbury Coffey about tough trays.
Yeah.
And I've seen that tough trays are getting a bit of heat at the moment. They're definitely something I've used in settings. I actually have one at home. But where have we gone so wrong with tough trays?
So I don't think anyone's arguing that tough trays are a problem in terms of we should get rid of them all. I think it's just potentially the use of them, and the fact that we're seeing social media breed, and Pinterest and that idea of social media pedagogy breeding the rise of what is now, just as Aaron says, like a new worksheet. You just can put something in there. It's an easy resource where you can contain the children's play. You can make sure that whatever this resource is doesn't go anywhere else. You can write a little instruction in it and the children can go and play with it independently. Now, we can have an argument about whether or not they can play with it independently, as often the instructions are for children who aren't developmentally able to read those instructions. But everything, you can use everything limitedly. Like, everything has got a value as long as it's not used too much. And every day you could go on social media and see 50, 60, 70, 80 tough trays of setup of the day, and that comes from, unfortunately, it comes from companies, it comes from businesses that are promoting tough trays, which is completely fine and it's got a purpose, but it isn't a replacement for playing on the floor. Someone shared before a tough tray, and I'm sure Aaron, it was a thread that Aaron had been involved in on Twitter, of Lego in a tough tray and saying, can you build a castle? Okay, but why is it in a tough tray? That would be my argument, is we've always got to think about the why, and I don't think we do that enough. I think we just see something and we think that looks nice, that's got some benefit to it, there's some learning that will take place there, but without really thinking about, well, we could take that out of the tough tray and the children will get the exact same value of that, and would they get more value from that from before? But it's not just about tough trays really, it's more about understanding the why of what you do. So everything that you do in your setting and everything that you do with your children, you've got to know why you're doing that, and it can't just be because your favourite teacher shared it on Instagram and you think it's great.
I think something you said there, social media pedagogy, is such it's such a perfect way of describing what we're seeing. Yeah. Where there is such a focus on the most beautiful invitation to play. So you see these incredible setups, really detailed, and they look beautiful. But do you think we are lacking in our practice with that why question?
Yeah, I think it's really easy when you're under time pressure, when you're under money pressure, when you just need to set something up for that day, when you're under staffing pressure that we're all facing at the moment as a sector, to see something the night before and think that's great, we'll add that out. That'll keep the children distracted for a period of time, that'll keep them engaged for a period of time, without understanding the reasons behind it, what the children are going to get from it, and whether or not it's actually got the value that you hope, as well as getting sucked into the influencer world where you are setting something up that looks beautiful and is great and will have value, of course it will, but just so you can share it on Instagram and get those likes. And that's a wider problem of how we as people, as humanity, use social media for that gratification and for that, and how we share that. All of those things at play, I think, can do that. And yes, the rise of the early years in education, social media, which we've all benefited from, I'll hold my hands up and say it's helped me in my career, how we've all benefited from that. But is it now going too far, and is it just becoming something that, like a worksheet before, which was an easy way you could print off, download and put it on the table for the children, is that now just the new version of that?
I think it's a really interesting point. It's a really interesting point, and the way that we think about our practice in terms of how we develop and how we get ideas and how we learn. Are we... Yeah. Let me rephrase it. think it's an interesting point. But what I'd love to talk a little bit more about is, why is it that we're looking to social media like that to learn and develop our practice? Is that the right place to look for inspiration, or where else could we maybe find more reliable ways to develop our practice?
I think it's accessibility in a way. It's people's professional development, and there's a massive focus on professional development, which there should be. And it's trying to find the way that that's free and easy and accessible, again, with the budget constraints that people have got. And it is a brilliant way to share ideas. Like, you get some wonderful ideas on there. So it obviously does, of course, add value. But it comes down to, you know your children best, and you know what works for your children best. And the only way that you can truly have that impact is if you're doing something that will meet their needs and will help them progress and learn those knowledge and skills. So you've got to, I'm not saying don't recreate anything that you see, I'm saying, but only do it because you know it's going to add value and because it's of interest to those children. Don't just do it because it looks great, or your favourite person does it, or it fits in with a philosophy or an ethos that you want to follow, or an accreditation that you're following. All of those things all come together, and I think they all converge on this thing where you are just recreating something for the sake of recreating it, because you want to be part of that group, because you want to be seen as having that influence, and you want to be seen as being part of that, rather than actually being because it's good for your children in your setting.
I think that's excellent advice, and it's a brilliant way for educators to almost do a bit of a litmus test when they look at something and think, oh, that's amazing, I want to do it, but then take a minute to think, actually, does it fit with my children? Will it meet the needs of my cohort? And why am I doing it?
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent advice.
Yeah, I think it's the why. That's the most important thing. I think that's what we know. That's what we should be asking all the time. But it's just real easy not to. But you've got to. Even when you see it on social media, ask people, why have you done that? What was the reason behind that? And see if they can justify to you why they've done that and what value their children got out of it.
I love that. That is excellent advice, and I think that's a brilliant place to end as well. We should all be asking why a little bit more. So Thank you so much, Anne.
No problem. Thank you very much.